Hello and welcome to Jack's Coffee Break. My name is Jack.
And I'm Raven.
And this is our coffee break. So today we are going to try and talk about pandas. And I emphasize the try because I know a decent amount about pandas, but for the most part what I know is the basic stuff. Raven over here knows a whole lot more than I do. So I'm going to give him whatever lead-in questions I can. He's going to answer. And then hopefully we're going to edit this down so that way it actually fits in the video, because the last few times he's tried to record this, it lasted how long?
The first time it took 2.5 hours. The second time it took about an hour and a half to an hour 15, depending. And then the third time I managed to get it as small as I could, and it got down to a nice, neat runtime of 50 minutes. So sadly, Big Bear Bend has been on pause as I've been trying desperately to give the facts on pandas while not talking our lovely viewers' ears off, so.
Yeah, he's having the same problem with the pandas that I just about had with the brown bears. So, let's cover the very basics. Let's talk about where pandas live.
Well, for starters, they're endemic to China, which means that their actual native area is a huge chunk of the Asian peninsula. What we would normally consider closer to the Beijing area is around where they originated.
And if I understand correctly from my research, they are considered a national treasure by China, yes?
They are. They are considered a national treasure. Actually, specifically, the giant panda is considered a national treasure. The term panda has very many other naming, and essentially is another word for bear in general. So what we refer to as a panda bear in American slang and inside of our culture is the giant panda, which is what we normally see as the big white and black with kind of ninja eyes. That's what we would consider our panda. It is their giant panda.
And of course, we will be visiting another panda next week, just to sort of contrast and explain what makes one an actual bear versus another one who is not actually a bear. So, from this I also understand that China holds full control over all of its pandas, and that they are able to lend them out or to redact ownership at any given time.
Yes, so pandas actually do not belong to any one zoo, they belong to the Chinese government. There is a massive set of laws and bylaws in place to ensure the safety of each panda, and if you want to acquire one panda, let alone two, it is a very extensive process, which is why you hear about these massive multinational efforts whenever you get two pandas in the same place to get it on, as it were. It's a genuinely difficult thing to do because you have to have the Chinese government, and whichever government the zoo is a part of, to come together basically and form a peace treaty of sorts that can be a month to 2 month long process of making sure that these pandas have the exact correct specifications of suite. Because when pandas go into what we would normally call a habitat, it's not a habitat, it's a suite. It is quite literally perfectly controlled temperatures, perfectly controlled humidity. It is the same thing as if you have a $6,000 snake, except for unlike being someone who has a really nice reptile, you're someone who is literally holding a national treasure that China will go to war over. So, have to be extra careful.
And that actually goes with something that I was reading the other day. Now, I am waiting for more peer review before I take this as absolute fact. But there are preliminary results that indicate that pandas can experience what we might call jet lag. And it's not jet lag in the sense that their internal clock is off, but it's more that their entire internal climate and settings are even off.
You're referring to something that we haven't been able to fully prove yet, but is actually a really, really interesting dynamic that we've seen in multiple types of animals. We have just started to see it in pandas as of late because of a few varying things that they've gotten approval to test on pandas, because there's so few of them. For starters, I mean, it's an endangered species the same way that the dodos were an endangered species. They're 10 steps away from extinction, so...
Right, it's like how there's only about 6,000 cheetahs left in the wild or so.
Exactly. It's a very difficult thing to even begin to talk about testing on pandas without every government in the world rearing their heads like just any scene in Jurassic Park. Just, you said what? And so when it comes down to certain reviews like that one, I did read that one the other day. That one was talking about how they have climate deficiency issues whenever they're not in specific forms of climate and temperature control.
Yes.
And this came about as a study that started to be shown because of a mishap that thankfully did not start World War III with the New York Zoo.
Oh, okay.
Their temperature control climate system completely fried. And so for it was insane, a whole 15 minutes, those pandas didn't have the correct temperature. It was very scary for a lot of people, and I wish I was joking. But once they got it all set back up, they noticed that the pandas seemed kind of like similar to the kind of illness that we have whenever we're just getting off a plane after an 8-hour flight. Their body kind of was slow and lethargic. They seemed to be off. And so that's one of the only major things that's happened, but we're trying to get case studies going for this to see if maybe they have a very similar issue that we do, and maybe if we can find a treatment to our forms of sickness through the pandas, as well as their own sicknesses that they have. For example, if we actually do find out that there's a commonality between the way that they're getting sick like this and the way that we get sick, it could lead to anything from better ways to treat seasickness and jet lag and such.
Interesting.
So that is a thing that people have started to look into. It's deeply, deeply not confirmed territory, though. I want to expressly state that.
Yeah, no, these are preliminary results. These are things that they're experimenting with that have been in the news. Because they've been in the news, I wanted to talk to you about them.
Yes.
So let's move back into the territory of things that are well known and well documented.
Yes.
So let's talk about their diet, because there's sections of it that are well known. The fact that they eat bamboo. And there's a lot of questions that we have about this.
So 99% or about there of their diet is actually bamboo. And by bamboo, I don't just mean the leaves, and I don't just mean the stem of the bamboo plant. I mean the whole entire bamboo. I'm talking about the roots, the stem, the leaves. Every single part of it is actually something a panda digests and eats regularly. They are, for all intents and purposes, the only real bare vegetarian we have, except for that 1% of the proteins and carnivorousness that they exude, which is they will have eggs, they will eat some smaller marsupials very rarely, but more often than not, they're eating bamboo, primarily. Their digestive tract over the years has very consciously has evolved into eating mostly bamboo, and that was actually to basically so that way they didn't have to compete with the other predators in that area at that time, because if they did have to compete, they would have just failed.
So one of the things that I find very interesting about this is the comparisons that I think we can draw between the panda and the koala. How both of them seem to have evolved to eat these relatively unnutritious vegetative sources, where other cousins and relatives within their group have a much more varied diet.
Yes, they both over time, basically, it was you can adapt to a completely new situation when it comes down to what you're eating, and take in something that is similar enough in nutrients with a few deficiencies here and there, so you're going to have to give up a few things, or you can just be wiped out by the fact that the other predators are just going to overeat you. And pandas can definitely protect themselves, and koalas are actually pretty good at protecting themselves as well, and other animals that adapt to eating a singular food, they can protect themselves most often. But the actual issue comes from that they are missing certain key traits that other other animals tend to have. For example, the Bengal tiger. And so as other forms besides that have become more prevalent throughout Asia as time went on, pandas basically went, we can push for this thing, or we can cut our losses, and we have this amazingly very nutritious for us. I have to say for us, because bamboo is not nutritious to humans, by the way. Very nutritious for us, the panda, the giant panda.
Everybody say hi to Oliver.
Yes, Ollie has hopped onto the building. It's very nutritious for them, and it's only specifically because of that they were like, okay, yeah, we can start adapting to this. it was not something that probably came about as a one-off thing. It was probably lots of them were starting to just specifically gnaw on this one plant specifically because it tasted good. And then over time, the ones who did came together, evolved, and naturally adapted to eating specifically the bamboo plant.
Sort of going along with this, one of the things that sort of interested me quite a bit on the subject is that not only are they the only ones who are really capable of eating and digesting this food source, this bamboo, but in other bear species we often see that they will eat anything and everything, and it usually lends them to eating food sources that other animals would normally avoid. That's likely how we ended up getting into the situation with the pandas in the first place, if I'm understanding you correctly. But moreover, that they end up becoming these sort of balancing acts for other aspects of their ecology and their environment within their trophic niche, as it were. I think that's the biological term. So, for example, in this case, I wouldn't be surprised to learn that because pandas have gone to eating exclusively bamboo, and bamboo, of course, being a species of grass, it's a very fast-spreading grass.
Yes.
In ordinary circumstances, without a natural predator, the bamboo could easily choke out entire forests. Do I have that correct?
Actually, yes. So, really weird dynamic that kind of occurred there is bamboo is one of the hardier grasses. In fact, it's one of the hardiest grasses that we know of.
Yeah, you can use it as a building material.
Well, not only as a building material, you can use it for all forms of graded construction as well. So it's something that you can use as a reinforcement for various things. It's a very tough wood, even though it's a grass. It grows as fast as grass does. It is easily replaceable as grass is, and yet it is something that you treat like a wood. So if it weren't for the fact that it's a combination, it's a really interesting combination of giant pandas, and there are some herbivores that have adapted to have strong enough jaws to chunk through bamboo. But pandas really take it down compared to any other herbivore because of the fact that they require so much more nutrient than a normal herbivore tends to, just from the fact that they're getting most of their nutrients not from meat and veggies and everything. They're getting it from this plant. And so they devour, and if it weren't for that, yeah, it would choke out entire swaths of land, with the only thing really stopping it would be, funnily enough, climate.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, of course, one of the other things that I've seen in doing my research, especially for the sun bears are really where we start to see some interesting variations in biology. So a lot of bears fit into this very specific mold. You know, they will hibernate, they will live in these sort of taiga, sort of colder climates. They do have this need where they usually eat about 6,000 calories a day, and this is in preparation for that long period of hibernation where they're not going to be able to eat anything, they're barely going to be able to drink anything, and so their entire biology is sort of governed by this internal clock that is this eat, sleep, sort of driven thing. We start to see this fall apart when we get to the Southeast Asian bear species, especially the panda, especially the sun bear. And of course, with the sun bear, what we see is this lack of hibernation and the ability to forage. So they overall end up needing a significantly lowered amount of calories, and they're expending less of that energy in one go of it, as opposed to, throughout the entire year. So they're behaving more like the animals of that area. What are we seeing in terms of pandas on that front?
Pandas as well do not hibernate at all. In fact, they go into forms of lethargic states as a form of sleep, meditative rest, I guess you could call it. But they do eat a substantial amount of calories for a bear that does not hibernate, because of the fact that they, even though they tend to have very densely specific areas that they roam a lot in that area, and they're constantly patrolling it, as well as they're constantly expending energy to eat the bamboo that they're eating, because it takes a lot out of them to consume the bamboo. Originally, they were omnivores, specifically and totally willing to eat everything, like all bear species, and they've over time adapted to become more of a vegetarian diet, and that has led to them needing more calories to actually work through the food currently, which is one of the reasons why they can go through upwards of 8,000 calories a day if they have to. And I say if they have to because with them specifically, it can wildly change depending on which panda we have in our group set. It's interesting how unique each individual of the panda species that we currently have is, because we have some that eat a lot, and then we have some that just eat 4,000 calories a day. It just depends on which panda and with how energetic they are. One thing that is very interesting, though, is that because they do not hibernate, and because they specifically have this one food source for themselves, they specifically decide on a territory, and it is very rare to see a panda move from that territory. It is one and done, which also is yet another issue with the whole pandas meeting each other over time. Once they evolve into the correct maturities to have children, it becomes very difficult for them to find each other because they stay in their lanes.
Yeah, that is definitely one of the things that I think is more well documented, is just how difficult it is to get pandas to breed. And this isn't just in captivity, this is a species-wide thing. One of the things that I have been curious about, and you may have answers for this, is whether or not the stringency and the difficulty in consuming their diet is partly contributing to these reproductive issues that they're having.
Now, anything beyond that point right there, it's partially speculative, because we have a lot of information that would point toward yes. We have a lot of things that basically say yes because of how stringent their diet is, because of how specific their very niche plant that they eat is. They don't often go anywhere else, and because they have what they have, and that's it. And so this can lead to terrible issues when it comes down to they don't migrate at all. They barely feel the need to interact socially with each other, and whenever it is social interaction, it's a very specific group set of social interactions. Like, there's an entire chunk of panda psychology that we've documented of literally before and after a panda becomes a parent. It's a very different animal psychologically. And so all of these things contribute to the fact that when a panda's never had kids before, they don't want kids after. And they don't want kids, period, because they don't psychologically have the need to change anything about themselves. And they don't have as strong as an instinct as other mammals when it comes down to the need to procreate and reproduce, we've noticed.
Interesting. So if I'm understanding you correctly, essentially, before a female panda has her first litter, there's no interest, there's no draw whatsoever to actually begin that state of their life.
Not really, no. There is specific... So, you might hear often, there's 2 days out of the year that a panda will...
they're fertile, yes.
Will be fertile. That's not entirely true, but it might as well be, which is why we say it. It's because of the fact that pandas specifically only have certain amount of times where the females and the males are both interested enough to actually begin the process and not lose interest in the fact that they have to be around another panda. They're very independent, and up until they actually have that process, which psychologically we've noticed changes them, they're just blasé about the entire situation. And the female pandas tend to never be interested in the idea of becoming a mother, and males never think about going and running forward to try and find a mate. That it does not happen in their species.
Right. The draws are not there in the same way that they are for other species. Well, I think that we're getting fairly close to our time. So with that, thank you very much for joining me. Hopefully we will get this cut down and shipped out by the end of the week. Very much appreciate having you here. Next week we will be talking about their cousins in name only, the red panda.
Which is, boy howdy, a whole new level. So we will see you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you next week.